Welcome to the Hsu-Tang Library Podcast. Made possible by a generous gift from Agnes Hsu-Tang and Oscar Tang, the Hsu-Tang Library of Classical Chinese Literature is a major new series publishing bilingual editions of Chinese literature from the Zhou dynasty to the end of the imperial era in 1911. In this first episode, we learned more about Daoist Master Changchun's journey to the West as translators Ruth Dunnell and Shao-yun discuss the medieval travelogue genre as a whole and what makes this example so unique. Furthermore, they will discuss whether or not Changchun had any influence on the court of Chinggis Qan. Thank you, Ruth and Shao-yun. I'm going to recite the first question. So most readers, Western readers, will find this book to be remarkable for many reasons. But you mentioned that this was part of a genre of travelogues in 13th century China. Could you briefly describe the genre and what makes Changchun's journey so unique?
So one of the more interesting things about this text that we translated is that it doesn't fall into just one genre. It actually straddles at least two. So one of these genres actually goes back to the Han Empire. That's a long time before the 13th century. And we're talking about ambassadors going into a place like Central Asia from the Chinese Empire and coming back and reporting or writing an account or a record of what they saw out there. So the customs, the geography, the geopolitics, what states exist in that region. And that the audience of that really is the emperor. It's to inform the emperor and his court on how to kind of formulate foreign policy with regard to, let's say, Central Asia. Now, the other genre that this text actually falls a little more into, although it straddles two, is poetic travel diaries. And that genre actually came out of, I think, the late Tang period, but really became popular in the Song period. So, and this is mostly about travel within the Chinese Empire, to different landmarks, different provinces. And these literati who are traveling would write poems as to accompany diary entries describing what they saw. So what you have in this text is a person writing a poetic travel diary concerning travel not just within the Chinese world, but far beyond it. And so it shades in many places into a kind of ethnographic account that looks a little more like the kind of embassy accounts or diplomatic accounts or diplomatic reports that would exist when the Chinese empires actually had more contact with Inner Asia or Central Asia. So the kind of historical context we're talking about here is one in which the Chinese world or the Chinese elite have really not had much interaction with Inner Asia, including Central Asia, for a number of centuries by this time. And so Qiuchuji or Changchun is actually entering into a world that the Chinese have not actually seen or interacted with for a good amount of time, and he's trying to make sense of how it's changed since the last time that the Chinese actually had detailed embassy accounts of what they saw in these places.
I would add to that another thing that makes this particular account unique in the early 13th century among the others is that it is an entirely personal and unofficial record in the sense that Qiuchuji set out on these travels in answer to a summons that he felt he could not turn down. So it wasn't his idea to go, traveling to see sites. But it is still an unofficial record. He's not reporting back to anyone except to his own organization, his own Daoist, sect and their followers. So in that sense, it does straddle these boundaries, as Shao-yun described. It's also very unique in that here we have a description of an encounter with Chinggis Khan, a direct encounter with Chinggis Khan that doesn't exist in any of the other travel accounts I can think of that are genuine travel accounts. And not just one audience, but a series of conversations and extensive interactions that leads to a personal relationship. Even if Cho didn't want that personal relationship, it's clear that the Khan, however disappointed he might have been in the message, felt obliged, felt concerned for Cho and kept inquiring after his welfare and wished him well and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a reluctant relationship, you could say. It's also the longest and most vividly detailed early record of travel through Mongolia and into the depths of Central Asia and back for this time period of such tumultuous change with the rise of the Mongol Empire.
Oh, fascinating. That leads actually to the next question I had, which is about their relationship and whether or not Changchun, if we could tell if he had any influence on Chinggis Khan. I understand it that the Khan had solicited input from several different faiths that the peoples he had conquered, and I'm wondering if Taoism had a particular place in his thinking or in his idea of governance in any way.
This was really, I'm trying to think now, but this is pretty early, 1219. I think this is the first time that the Khan has solicited or summoned a representative of a non-Mongol religion to his court. So it's a path-breaking kind of, I mean, the Khans were very curious and interested in any kind of information or technologies or devices that other people could offer them, right, that would promote their mission, as it were, help them protect themselves from enemies or unseen forces or achieve advantage on the battlefields. So, they were very interested in engineers, for example, people that could make weapons. And I guess religious clerics were seen as people who had control over, the unseen forces of the natural world. So in a sense, this is the first time that Chinggis Khan sort of establishes a policy of soliciting input from religious clerics, and that, of course, paves the way for future, interactions with other religious forces. But my sense is, and I think we all agree on this, is that he wasn't overwhelmed by the Daoist message. Do you want to speak to that, Shao-yun?
Yes. So it looks like, based on what the text says and what we know from elsewhere, that Chinggis Khan's main interest of taking interest in Quanzhen and in Tiuchuji was because that he had heard that the Taoist specialists held the secret to immortality. So Chinggis Khan at this time has become concerned about the fact that he's growing old, and there's still a lot of world left to conquer. So he is seeking out this Chinese Taoist priest in the belief that Tiuchuji will be able to present him with some kind of drug that can make him live forever. So when he actually gets to meeting Tiuchuji, I would say he's disappointed. All the text will never admit to that. I would say he was disappointed because Quanzhen Taoism was really not like earlier forms of Chinese Taoist practice, in that it kind of believed in a kind of what they call inner elixir or internal alchemy. So unlike earlier Taoist specialists who might have tried to use various chemical substances to concoct or to refine a medicine or a drug that they believed could make people immortal, Quanzhen Taoism believed that the best way to achieve immortality was through certain practices like abstaining from sex. And so basically Tiuchuji's whole message to Chinggis Khan is, I don't have to give you anything to eat. You just have to stop having sexual relations with your wives and concubines and think good thoughts, and things would follow from that. So, I mean, Chinggis Khan basically has a series of meetings with him and hears him preach each time, but pretty much the message each time is kind of the same thing, which is that if you just have less sex and try to reduce your stress levels, you don't have to eat anything special. You're going to live longer that way.
Yeah, I guess it didn't go over very well with him then, considering the history that we know of Genghis Khan, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had collected a lot of women during his conquest.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a hard sell to tell him to just stay with them.
I think half of Europe is somehow related to Genghis Khan, right? Can trace their roots back to him. All right, moving on to the next question. While reading this, one thinks of the many Western parallels of an emperor keeping a philosopher at court, such as Alexander keeping Aristotle or Nero keeping Seneca. In China, a tradition of enlightening a ruler, this must date back to Confucius. Can we tell if Changchun was conscious of this tradition? Were there any examples of such relationships that would have served as models for him?
This kind of relationship definitely predates Confucius, but that's Shao-yun's Shao-yun knows more about that, so I'll let him speak to it.
I would say Confucius is the wrong precedent or the wrong parallel in this case. We should really be looking more at two kinds of, you could say religious specialists that Chinese emperors had sought to bring into their courts. And one of these is the so-called masters of methods, or fangshi in Chinese. And these were the ones who basically, from all the way back in the Qin and Han dynasties, the first imperial dynasties of China, have been tasked with creating these immortality drugs for emperors to try and get them to live forever. And usually they didn't work. We know of no case in which they worked, but usually they actually kind of had the opposite effect, because they contained substances like cinnabar and mercury and sulfur that actually would kill you, or drive you insane first and then kill you. So, Chinggis Khan is essentially asking Qiu Chuji to be that kind of person for him, although he may not know about the Chinese tradition of that kind of specialist. And then you have in Chinese history also, and Ruth has studied this with regard to the Tangut kingdom of Xixia, this idea of a Buddhist monk who serves the emperor as a state preceptor, so kind of like the highest ranking Buddhist monk in the realm, who's in charge of all the other Buddhist monks and Buddhist monasteries, and basically is you could call them the guru to the ruler on how to be a good Buddhist and how to do good Buddhist things that increase your karma, or improve your karma and improve the karma of your entire realm, so that it gets stronger, more prosperous, and so on. So, Qiu Chuji was in a position to play one or both of those roles for Chinggis Khan, right? To make him the drug that would make him live forever, or at least claim to be doing so, and also to advise him on how to rule his empire and be a good Daoist. But the interesting thing about our account is that Qiu Chuji doesn't really want to stick around a powerful person like Chinggis Khan. When he tries his best to turn down the invitation to go all the way out to meet with Chinggis Khan. Well, at first he thinks he's going to go to Mongolia, and then Chinggis Khan moved on to Central Asia, and he has to keep moving to try and catch up with the head of imperial army. But even when he finally gets to Samarkand or to Central Asia and gets to meet with Chinggis Khan, he's kind of like, he does the bare minimum that he has to do, gives a series of lectures or sermons to Chinggis Khan, and then says, I just want to go back to China and go back to what I was doing. So there is this other kind of persona that is, at least this account, which is not written by Qiu Chuji, but it's written by one of his disciples who accompanied him for at least part of the journey, and then stopped somewhere in Central Asia and waited for the rest of them to come back, and then right back to China with his master. But the persona that's being created for Qiu Chuji is not that of a state preceptor, the guru to the emperor, is not that of the kind of immortality expert. It's really a Taoist recluse kind of persona, right? So this hermit that wants to stay away from the mundane and secular world as much as possible in order to cultivate themselves and thereby achieve immortality for themselves. So it's kind of, you get a sense that Qiu Chuji is worried that getting too close to the corridors of power, getting too close to political power is going to compromise or jeopardize his own mission for himself, which is really to become a transcendent or become an immortal and rise up into the heavens and be able to do magical stuff up there.
It's kind of a paradox, because at the same time, Qiu Chuji understands that he cannot turn down the invitation, that he has to make this trip, even though he doesn't want to and keeps trying to shorten it or get some kind of excuse on account of his old age or the rigors of the road or his diet. He can't eat what they're eating, so he has to go back to Samarkand. So he's a very reluctant traveler, and at the same time, he understands that he can't turn it down because he is a realist. He has this other side of him, which is practical, and he's a realist. And his followers, I think, understand that there's some advantage to be gained from taking this journey and establishing a relationship with this powerful person, and that is patronage, and they all want patronage. And given the tumultuous landscape of North China at this time, having the patronage of a powerful force behind you could make a huge difference, not only in the survival of your organization and its growth, but also in its ability to carry out its mission and recruit followers and help people. So I think that there are a lot of conflicting motives and responses present in the formation of this very peculiar relationship between Chinggis Khan and Qiu Chuji.
Right. So yeah, patronage is one side of it, and that's the best case scenario. And the Qiu Chuji, although he could not give Chinggis Khan exactly what the Khan had asked for, was able to secure that kind of patronage to the degree of tax exemption, which is a pretty significant privilege for the Changchun sect. But the flip side of patronage, of course, is if you don't give the Mongols what they're asking for, your survival itself could be at stake. The context is that before he received an invitation or a summons from Chinggis Khan, had already turned down similar requests by the Song Chinese emperor or the Jin Jurchen emperor. He was known for being difficult to invite or recruit. And so Chinggis Khan, one of the things that he says to Qiu Chuji is that the fact that you accepted my invitation and not those of other people shows how much you respect me, right? But I think if we look at it more realistically, the Mongols had shown themselves to be pretty ruthless towards people who said no to them, right? And so I think what we're seeing here is that Qiu Chuji realizes that this is a force that he cannot turn down because the consequences of doing so could be pretty dire. Whereas he felt a little more confident that the Jurchen Jin dynasty is on his last legs, so Mongols are on the verge of taking it down. The Song is not strong enough to do anything to him if he says no. The Mongols, on the other hand, you cannot refuse.
Right.
Great. So I was wondering, could you confirm that this travelogue was written and published and disseminated for his particular school of Taoism, right? For the disciples of Taoism, and if that's the case, do we have any idea what they would have made of this travelogue?
We thought about this. We don't really know, but then it occurred to me that their biggest concern appears to be establishing and the primacy of their organization over other rival organizations, and especially vis-a-vis the Buddhist, whom the Mongols eventually do make their sort of favored religious specialists.
Tibetan Buddhism in particular.
Yeah, Tibetan Buddhism in particular. So it seems to me that this text serves to legitimate and proclaim the special relationship that the Changchun Taoists have with the new Mongol Empire and emperor personally, himself in person, and the privileges that he has accorded them in terms of taking over temples and being tax exempt and that sort of thing. So that, I think, is probably what the audience of this text view as the most important function of it.
Right. So basically serving as a piece of evidence of the origins of the Khan's patronage for the Changchun sect, right? That there was this personal relationship that was built up when Qiu Chuji traveled all the way to the encampment of the Khan and preached to him. Having said that, where this text is actually kind of like the first step or the first stage in a process by which the Changchun folks mythologize this influence that they begin to claim that Qiu Chuji had over Chinggis Khan. We don't see it in this text yet, but in later texts produced by the Changchun tradition, they begin to play up even more the kind of civilizing influence that Qiu Chuji had on Chinggis Khan. So the claim comes to be that Qiu Chuji was the one who persuaded Chinggis Khan to stop killing so many people. Because the Mongols were known to massacre cities that refused to surrender to them. So if the Mongols give a city a choice. You surrender and join us, and then basically you get all kinds of good opportunities to rise in our service. If you resist, on the other hand, and we manage to defeat you, as we always do, right? Basically, you're all dead because you had a choice and you said no. So the story that comes out, and it's still pretty popular in China today because it tends to reinforce a certain view that the Han Chinese like to have of themselves, that that is civilized ones, and people like the Mongols, even though they're good at conquering, they can't actually rule an empire in a civilized way without Chinese influence or Chinese advice, right? The story comes to be that the main message that Qiu Chuji had for Chinggis Khan was not have less sex, but don't kill people anymore. And that Chinggis Khan actually listened, and the Mongol Empire thereby became much more humane. And by becoming more humane, became more successful and sustainable and all that kind of thing. So similar stories are told about later Chinese people who advised Khans like Kublai Khan, right? There's always this story about how, the Mongols were killing people left, right, and center, and then some wise Chinese advisor, usually a Confucian, not a Changchun Daoist as in this case, but more often in later periods, especially for Kublai, a Confucian advisor tells them, the Confucius and the other Confucian philosophers had the right idea, right? If you want to unify the world, you have to do so by not liking to kill people. And when you can do it that way, people are more likely to submit to you and you can get an empire more easily. That was not the Mongols' experience. The Mongols' experience was that if you terrorize them, they will surrender quicker. But the Confucian understanding of how to wage war and build an empire was actually, if you show humaneness and mercy, it's more likely that people will not resist you and will actually submit to you. That was the Confucian message about how empires should be run or built.
I had a quick follow-up. So you'd mentioned that other Daoist texts had mentioned this continuing relationship with the Mongols. Was that propaganda, or are there, is there evidence in the historical record that there was a relationship that was maintained between the Mongol Empire and this Daoist sect?
Oh, they had relationships with Daoists, and not just this Daoist sect, but just a few decades after this meeting between Chinggis and Shochuji, there were a series of debates at the court in the 1250s, at the court of Mongol Khan, Chinggis' grandson. And the upshot of these debates between Daoist, Buddhists, and Nestorian Christians was that the Daoists were always defeated in the debates. And eventually, a decree was issued banning the Dao De Jing, their text, or some other, and, destroying one of their recently compiled canons. But that didn't last very long. It didn't really trickle down and have any dire consequence on the Changchun sect on the ground. It did, however, mean that in terms of imperial patronage, they were lower on the totem pole, and the Buddhists kept rising. The Tibetan Buddhists kept rising to the top. But
yeah,
all religions received some degree of patronage under the Mongols, which distinguished them, well, all the ones they approved of anyway. If you were fomenting rebellion, they would not patronize you. So that distinguished them. That distinguished this religious policy the Mongols had from the one we see under Chinese regimes, which tended to be perhaps less tolerant or of religious sects in general. You want to add to that, Shao-yun, or is that more or less?
Yeah, I think you got most of that, right? So yeah, I mean, the Changchun sect does very well at the grassroots level in North China during the period of Mongol rule, and it's not necessarily because the Mongols are promoting them, but they have a message and they have a good organizing strategy that allows them to just spread everywhere. The Mongol elite, on the other hand, tends to take more toward Tibetan Buddhism. Perhaps it offers more of what they're looking for. And of course, in Central Asia, the Mongols convert to Islam eventually. So Taoism does not have much in the way of an appeal to the Mongol rulers, but it still does very well among ordinary Chinese. And one sense is that is where their target audience more likely was. They were not trying to convert Mongol aristocrats or Mongol Khans so much as they were just trying to kind of build their ground game among Chinese villagers and townspeople.
I had one final question. It's really for you, Shao-yun. I wonder if you could just briefly describe the amazing interactive map that you have created that is sort of a companion website to this book.
Right. So, when Ruth and I first began talking about collaborating on this translation, this idea popped into my mind of doing a digital kind of interactive map to go with it. And this is, I had been wanting to do maps of this kind for 15 to 20 years by that time. And the technology, as far as I knew, wasn't available yet. And then I realized from talking with a colleague of Ruth who works in digital humanities that story maps actually is a good option now. And so we looked into it. I've learned how to use it. So that was my first foray into story mapping. And since then, I've been doing it on other projects. So what you have with story maps is a kind of interactive mapping tool that can take you step by step along the journey on a map that essentially is satellite imagery. And along the way, you have information being given for every stop that Hsu takes along his trip. We also have traditional line maps accompanying the translation, but story maps basically can do so much more. It's so much more immersive, and there's so much more information that can be conveyed about what was seen along the way and what was done.
Great. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of the Hsu-Tang Library Podcast. Join us next time when we take a closer look at another text from the series, The Misadventures of Master Mugwort. You can find out more about the series by following the link in the description.